So hey guys, today I'm going to teach you guys how to play Master Duel like a tryhard. So the visuals won't be that good, but hopefully this information will be helpful anyways. So it doesn't really matter if we're going first or second, but let's just go with the perspective of going first. So if you're going first and you're dueling against another person, right? You will have just won the coin flip. So immediately off rip, our opponent should show like they have a response and their entire field should glow red just at the start of the draw phase immediately. And I kind of bricked here, but whatever. So let's go with one more hand then, I guess. I just drew all hand traps. Unlucky. But that happens to the best of us, I guess. Whatever. Okay, so normally the field on like draw phase would glow red. And this is just a small countermeasure because technically Maxi was always activatable at that point, like before, right? So that's just the countermeasure to not rat out that you have Maxi essentially, right? So your opponent, even though their entire field glows red, does not necessarily mean that they have any kind of response. But in this situation, assuming I was playing against another human being, right? Like here, uh, my opponent, right? They have 5 cards in hand, and I have Prio right now, so I can do whatever I want, and I will always be able to, like, just do whatever, right? And then my opponent will have to respond to it with something. So here, I think Kishira Unicorn is pretty good, so if I special summon Kishira Unicorn, nothing should happen, right? Literally nothing, okay? There isn't much you can do about, like, special summoning Kishira Unicorn at this point. Right here, you can activate Max C, assuming I was playing against another human, they should have some kind of extra deck. So if they maxi here, I can look at their deck, and if they have no response to like special summon Katir Unicorn, it doesn't mean they have no response. Whenever your opponent has no response, it does not mean they have no response. So right now, just for example, my opponent could have DD Crow in hand, my opponent could have Visuals in hand. This is not impossible, but you don't know for sure, right? You don't have the information, okay? But if your opponent suddenly like starts getting triggers, like after you have like a dark monster in the graveyard, like let's say for example I activate Dimension Shifter right now, and my opponent had no response, but now they have a response, I am pretty certain the card in their hand right now will be Magnemite, or some sort of bestial, like maybe a Serenir, maybe a Druid Worm. Doesn't super matter, but high chance that that is what my opponent has. So here, since I have Dimensional Fissure, right, and Kashira Unicorn, what can I play around right now with my hand? So right now I can't really super play around Maxi, but I can still abuse Maxi a bit, okay? So I am not required to special summon for the rest of this turn, actually, okay? So if I activate Dimensional Fissure here right now, Maxi, you either use this enchant dimensional fissure or you just hold it for the rest of your life. Those are your two options, realistically, in my opinion. I guess you could save it for a discard of something. I guess that's fine too. So the best play for me right now is actually to activate dimensional fissure right now. So if I do this, well, effect failure is not going to be activatable. But I mean, that doesn't matter. You'll just do effect failure and chain, so I can't really play around that. But Droll, if you have Droll and Lockbird, you cannot Droll here because Droll needs to be done in response to a certain type of effect. So that you can't Droll after I use Unicorn to add. And if you have Maxi, I can just play around it, right? So this is fine. And then here, the only realistic option I have is to add with Kashira Unicorn. So we do Unicorn effect, and if we got Maxeed, we just can simply add Birth, and then normal summon Kashira Ogre. And this could be better, but there are advantages to this as well. So this is bad only specifically in the mirror to pass on like just Unicorn, Ogre plus Fisher, but if I am against like most other decks, I have Imperm to do a negate, which is good enough, and also Ash Blossom Joe Spring, so that's pretty helpful. So that's pretty good. And I can't really do that much else, but we'll be able to have Ogre to grab prep as well. So if these guys are removed from the field by whatever means, I can still prep them back if necessary, right? And also I can birth them back as well. So that's a little reason why Dimensional Fissure is a little bit like, well, I wouldn't say necessarily strong. It's more like good in cash. Like if you were to play Fissure in cash, uh, Ogre becomes a bit more valuable, being able to add prep and prep bring back your other Kashtira monsters. But just in general, here we're going to probably just Theosis. So the only thing this doesn't play around is Ash Blossom Joe Spring, because we can still get like Ash Blossom Joe Spring on like Unicorn or Theosis. If we wanted to play around that, we would just simply grab Birth. So these are all options you have. So of course there is no trigger to rat out Ash. You kind of just have to like predict that they might have Ash. Depends how like valuable you think Ash is and like how likely your opponent has Ash right now. So let's special summon Fenrir and just get this combo line done now. Okay. So here, I'm gonna grab Rice Heart. And right now we have two options. So we can either do the Big Bang line, or we can just do the Arise Heart pass line. So honestly, either one is not too bad right about now. Just whatever's fine. But we actually have a little bit more of an interesting line. So let's see. This is the third summon. If we summon Shankar-Ira, that's fourth summon. So fifth summon will be Rise Heart, okay? So if we do specifically this, right? This isn't necessarily the best play. But if our opponent holds Nib, they're like till the actual end of main phase, there is kind of a line here. So if we do this, banish Big Bang, right? So we don't actually have to special summon the Fenrir here, right? If we special summon the Fenrir, that immediately puts us to 5 summons. I mean, you'll probably feel pretty pressured to do so, I guess. Well, let's just do the line because this doesn't play around Nib. So the only way we would have played around Nib is to use like Ice Heart, Fenrir, and Unicorn to make a Ice Heart and just pass on that. And that in general is just alright, you know, it's fine. It's not like egregious, it isn't too crazy. But what we can do instead right here is, because we don't care about the Shangri-La that much actually, we can actually do like this. So we're going to special summon on top of Rise Heart, Rise Heart, so this seems normal, right? Then normal summon Kajira Ogre, we're going to tribute 2 for this. Tribute being over either Rise Heart Fenrir or Fenrir Era. Both are just fine. It doesn't super matter. So if we do this, this actually plays around something crazily enough, right? So first off, this gives us a material on our Arise Heart. So we can grab Big Bang like this, just right now. And then we can grab Prep. So this line is actually better than you might think. So if I was playing against Snake Eye, we risk losing to Kurikara, right? So this line specifically, I'm not caring about Nib, okay? Instead, I'm going to worry about Board Breakers. We're going to essentially overcommit here to an extent. Assuming we get punished, it'll be overcommitting. If it's not, then we just made the right play, okay? So we have infinite impermanence, so in the mirror, we should probably never lose, right? With Imperm Arise Heart. Should be solid. And well, also a Big Bang, right? So here, we're going to just immediately activate this, might as well. Is this card's a piece of junk? Okay, now let's see what our opponent does. Okay, so they have normal summoned Witch of the Black Forest. So we can, if we wanted to, we could have in standby phase summoned back Shangri-Ira if we wanted, which is like interesting. But here, I guess let's just bring back Fenrir. Sure. So we have set 3 pass here, I guess, sure. In phase. Guess our opponent's not doing much here. So we do this. This gets banished here. Now we can select a card to be XYZ material. We'll just do Imperm, it's fine. And we won't get to use Big Bang Effect here because our opponent didn't send anything. And we didn't get to send Ash either, but if we were against another person, it's very likely that we would have had one more thing to trigger and then we would be able to summon Rise Heart. Or just whatever. Well, not Rise Heart, I guess it would probably be Unicorn. From Banished, right? So, okay. Guess we detach 3. Can't really activate Big Bang here, which is a shame, but okay. We don't know what that card is. We'll just grab back Big Bang. Second Fissure, doesn't really matter at this point. With just this prep, we can build like an insane amount of advantage. Like, just for example, watch this. Special Summon Shangri-Ira. Effect of Ira. Will special summon Fissure Unicorn. Activating Unicorn. Unicorn effect to grab Earth. Fenrir effect to add. I guess Rise Heart is fine. We'll do Rise Heart. The other option was actually to grab Rise Heart off of banishing Theosis, but we don't need to go that far, so we won't. But since we activated Shangri-Ira effect, that means we can summon another Rise Heart. So now we can also do this. So we're going to grab some mats, I guess. So let's banish Tier Cash. And now let's start like grabbing a few cards. Doesn't matter too much, I don't think, what we grab here. So we just have to make sure to grab at least Unicorn. Then we can grab whatever. I genuinely don't think it matters. And then here, let's, to play around the back row, I guess, do Dark Armed. So I guess we'll use Unicorn because our opponent doesn't actually have any back row here. Or no, not back row. They don't have an extra deck for us to banish anyways. Yeah, tries hard. Get rid of the back row. Banish Theosis. Effect. We'll add Rise Heart back to hand, I guess. I think we still have our normal summon as well, if we wanted to extend that way. But as you can see, the clapback is pretty strong here. You know, just... But we have a lot of going second place here. Or not going second, turn 3 plays. And now we have multiple activations on our Rise Hearts, and then we can even do like special summon Tier Cash. And then Tier Cash effect. And then we'll send our opponents because we have everything in rotation. And we're just doing this to get more material onto our Rise Hearts, which is one thing that tier cash is really helpful with, but it also mills out our opponent, which is like somewhat beneficial. So right now I'm really playing with fire. If I were playing against another person, I would never like extend this far unless I had to, because if our opponent actually drew nib, I would have just lost pretty much to an extent. I mean, if I kept like prep or birth at least, I'd be fine because I can actually prep back this Rise Heart later. So in that regard, we're perfectly chilling, right? But yeah. You just have to think about all of your opponent's responses, and even if your opponent has no response, it doesn't mean they have no response. Like, if I activate, for example, let's say Ishtira Unicorn, and my opponent doesn't have a response to this does not mean my opponent necessarily does not have Ash Blossom Joy Spring. This just means there is still the potential that your opponent turn Chain to off for Ishtira Unicorn, and they're just a toggle Andy, and they will actually toggle back on for Theosis. Like, you don't have any proof that that will not happen, right? So, it's pretty hard to tell if your opponent has something or not. And if I wanted, for example, I can make Zeus on top of one of these two guys. Or like an Abillion Material Zeus, as you do. But yeah, this is essentially the try hard mentality. You kind of have to think about everything and be paranoid about everything. So for example, even though you know your opponent, like you're assuming your opponent has potentially these hand traps, the best option is like just to play into it. Depending on your hand, that might be your best option. So even if you know your opponent might have something, it's better to actually, instead of thinking about nib specifically, it's like, what? Oh no, I'll get nibbed. I'm screwed. Instead of thinking like that, it's much better to think, okay, they'll probably nib me. So what can I do to force them to nib me, and when can I realistically do this? And also, what can I possibly do after the Nibiru? It's better to look from that perspective, you know, just look a few steps ahead. And what even is this deck, honestly? I don't know why they didn't activate Danger Zone. This discards, right? Yeah, weird. Okay. And just like that, 6 Matt, Kishira, Arisar. Huzzah. And I'll just grab whatever. Imagine if I had Diablosis here. Now that'd be brutal. But yeah. You should always be thinking about just what you could be doing, right? So if I got max seed like turn 1, I would be perfectly fine still. If I got hit by like effect failure, it's not the end of the world there either. It's just I'm mostly looking at if my opponent actually has a way to remove my unicorn. If they have another hand trap for unicorn, that would be a little problematic depending on how that goes. But in general, uh, we're doing pretty fine, right? So yeah. And also, I might switch Troll for something else later because it's becoming a little less valuable right now. But just in general, we can play around a lot of things if we just think about it ahead of time. And by checking our opponent's like triggers and responses, depending on how good of a player our opponent is, actually. So if certain things like start triggering, like there's not much we can do about it. If we already hit 5 summons with certain hands, we can't recover from Nib at any point, no matter when it hits us. So at times like that, sometimes it's better to just hope that your opponent's actually just bluffing you and they do not have Nibiru, and you should just fully extend as much as possible. Uh, sometimes that is the case, right? And for example, with that previous hand, we actually had infinite impermanence, right? And here's another thing to think about. For example, let's say my opponent does normal summon Moyi, okay? Or just something like that, right? I didn't have full mats on my copy of like uh Kashtira or Ice Heart, I would be at like 1 mat, right? So assuming I did the like 1 mat combo, right? Just the normal good old combo. If normal summon Moyi, do you like imperm this? Or let's say I actually did have like a different response, like or maybe like Ash Blossom Joe Spring. So there's actually so much that goes on here. It's actually crazy. Okay, so well, I guess Kashtira isn't a good example for this. Like just a deck with like a monster negate. Like let's say I have just a Crystal Wing pass. Okay, my opponent does normal summon Moyi. I have imperm set. So you realistically have two options here, right? We can one negate Moyi with Crystal Wing. Two, we can imperm the Moyi. So the crazy thing is there's actually demerits to both these options, but the typical answer is that you would probably want to imperm your opponent because this plays around like tactics, right? So if we don't activate any monster effects, our opponent cannot use triple tactics talents, and they cannot like steal our crystal wing. They cannot like do draw two. They cannot look at our hand. They cannot do any of that, and we still also negate the Moyi, right? So obviously that sounds pretty beneficial, but is there a downside? Yes. Yes, there is. Your opponent actually could have red reboot, right? And with the example of Moyi in particular, right? So if normal summon Moyi and then you make Chizao, right? If we don't negate Moyi, let's say, with Crystal Wing, and we get hit by red reboot, right? Then your opponent can make Chizao and it will actually chain block Chizao search, right? So chain one Chizao, chain two Moyi. And then here, you can only chain 3 Crystal Wing, right? So if your opponent specifically has Red Reboot, right? Uh, this will uh, essentially negate your infinite impermanence, right? And you will not get the negate on the Moyi. But in this case, if your opponent just simply has Red Reboot and not much else, then the Moyi would just get destroyed, sent to the graveyard, and their turn would be over, right? So if you actually activate Crystal Wing, you're actually not just retaining your imperm, like it's kind of greedy, but if you think about it in a greedy way, you can only imperm like once, right? But every single turn you'll be able to Crystal Wing negate as well. So if you actually Crystal Wing first, you're also able to hold onto imperm for longer, assuming you can't lethal next turn. Then it'll be live again next turn alongside Crystal Wing still, instead of just having potentially only a Crystal Wing. We're just looking at uh, what's on field and just in terms of that, right? So in that sense, keeping imperm is kind of also a greedy play. But if we just use it, there's also a payoff in the sense that if our opponent has like a triple tactics card, they cannot activate it because we did not activate any monster effects. And yeah, there's the risk, of course, that they do have tactics, and we just lose our crystal wing that way. And it actually gives insulation for like our hand traps as well if they had triple tactics and possibly an extender. So worst case scenario, let's say crystal wing effect activates, and then our opponent special summons Ecclesia, activates tactics to steal Crystal Wing, and I believe with Crystal Wing they actually can't negate if we did negate though. So it, there's that benefit. I think actually potentially it depends on the exact monster, but there's some monsters that don't work like this, right? You can negate activation if you do destroy that monster. No. Never mind. I'm pretty sure our opponent can activate Crystal Wing. It's not the same as Baron. If it were Baron, they would not be able to activate the effect to negate, I guess. I think that's how Crystal Wing works anyways. But there are probably better examples to work with, whatever the case. Now they are insulated towards like your monster hand traps now. So if you still have imperm, I guess you can imperm like Taya, which isn't like the worst thing. But at minimum, like your opponent can probably link off the Crystal Wing and do like a decent chunk of damage too. So still not great. Assuming you have like more bodies, like maybe you have another point of interaction. Like I don't know. Well, let's say doesn't super matter. You have like maybe a specific type of interaction, like maybe Draco Berserker with Crystal Wing. Then Crystal Wing could just run over Draco Berserker unconditionally and then just be linked off, and you're much worse. It depends exactly on the situation, I guess, because uh, Master Duel or Yu-Gi-Oh in general is kind of case by case. So it depends on the exact situation, right? But like, of course, if we infinite impermanence, we aren't playing around Red Reboot, and our opponent might be able to resolve their monster effect, and we wouldn't really be able to do much about that. So there is that risk whenever you're trying to do like imperm, right? And then there's also the risk of if you use your monster effects, you're not playing around tactics. But if you do not play around tactics, there's actually a bigger payoff, like on a later turn potentially. So there is just a whole lot to think about and choices to be made. It is up to you to make the choice, but the general safe play, of course, is that your opponent probably does not have red reboot. That is like more unlikely than your opponent having like a tactic. So generally, the safer play is to actually activate infinite impermanence to negate your opponent's monster's effects, and this is a pretty safe play, just in general, to just imperm, right? But it would be a pretty hard read to just not imperm and instead to like activate Crystal Wing, right? So yeah, you have to be mindful of like a lot of things because there is a probability of something happening, like just all the time. Like, for example, your opponent having super poly. So if you actually imperm, you essentially are losing the imperm. If you actually wait on it later, they don't have like, and they have to go through their combo. They might not actually have a good target to fuse away with your monsters, and in terms of their monsters. But also if you imperm, they get to do their search, and your imperm doesn't go off anyways. So just a a lot to think about in general. This is all like very case by case, and it helps to play a deck more, so you can think more and more about your things, and like just in general, whenever you lose an interaction like this where you could have played better or you could have outplayed it, like when you get hit by red reboot after infinite imperm, like in the situation I was saying before, uh there are two benefits to this. So the first is now you know this is an option, and uh in like some situations you might be able to have played around it, but you also have to, of course, be thinking of, was this reasonable for me to play around? Was this reasonable for me to think about? Did I actually know my opponent had this? How much information did I have? Like, technically, the actual best play would be to not activate imperm, and with the crystal wing situation in red reboot, right? But did you have the information of red reboot? No, right? So if you never knew your opponent had red reboot, of course, then uh, just using imperm is not that unreasonable, and you shouldn't like beat yourself up over it too much, right? Even though like in some cases this is a completely game losing kind of play, right? Where you chose to imperm. It if instead you chose to crystal wing, you would be completely winning, perhaps, right? And yeah, even if that is the case, with the information you had, the best typical play, of course, is to activate the infinite impermanence. So there's not that much you could do about this unless you were just a god gamer, essentially, right? So if you were able to actually hard read this like that much, then maybe, then I guess maybe you would go for this play. But yeah, still pretty rough in general. So yeah, that's all I got for you guys today. And hopefully, maybe one of these days, uh, I'll be able to just become a god gamer, you know, and be able to say, yeah, I know you have Red Reboot because I feel it in my gut, you know. My ancestors told me. So I will not be improving here. I will be activating Crystal Wing instead. So maybe one of these days that'll come up. So maybe one of these days I'll be good enough to do that. I don't know if that's really a skill thing though. But yeah, I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.